Hey Home Church, great to see you tonight. Wonderful to be on week 2 of our home groups. Had some great reports from last week. Of course, as always, when we're making such a massive change to move a large church to a completely new way of doing things, there's always going to be one or two teething issues. So we'll work as best we can in these things to get everything done as smoothly as possible. But thanks to everyone for your grace and understanding as we try and do that. And a massive thank you to Pastor Phil, to John and Joyce, to the cluster leaders for helping us get the home groups off the ground. Just a very quick reminder of our hope for the small groups, for the home groups. We've got 4 sort of central pillars that we want to see achieved through the groups. The first one is to build meaningful relationships. So we trust that you enjoyed getting to know each other last week. Obviously, there's a massive focus on spiritual growth. We want to see people maturing in faith, increasing in their Bible knowledge and growing together as a church family. Massive for leadership development as well. We hope through the groups to grow many leaders, and ultimately we hope one day that even churches might be planted out of home groups that grow beyond a certain size. And obviously we want to be a massive blessing to our community. That's just a massive thing for home church generally moving forward, is how can we best bless our community. So be having a think about this year, over the remainder of the year, how can we best bless the communities that God has placed us in. So obviously we're getting used to how we're doing this today. I'm going to give probably 7 points based on the passage that we looked at on Sunday. Obviously we were looking at the life of Joseph, which is an incredible story, and there's so much in it. We could do a whole Bible study series just based on this one character. I'm going to give 7 sections tonight, and each section will have 3 questions for you to discuss. What I suggest is, this video is obviously just newly put up online. If you happen to come across it and you're watching it by yourself, you still feel free to do this study and ask yourself the questions that I'm going to ask. But if you're in a group, in a home, anywhere around Scotland, what my suggestion would be is, once I've went through section 1, just give this video a pause, set probably say a 10-minute timer on someone's phone, and discuss the questions for 10 minutes. Then unpause your phone, listen to section 2. At the end of the day, if you don't get through all sections, it doesn't really matter anyway. This is about relationships and about really thinking about what is there to be learned from the passage and how can we best apply that to our lives. I would far rather you figured out how to properly apply sections 1 and 2 than we're so focused on getting through sections 1 to 7 that you rushed so fast and never actually landed on anything. So I hope that makes some sense. So after each section, why not just pause the video, 10-minute timer or so, and answer the questions and just see how we go on. And then I'll take feedback on how this works and we'll move forward from there. So we were in the story of Joseph on Sunday, an incredible story. And section 1 focuses on when God gave Joseph a dream. So I would like you to read, when you pause the video, Genesis 37 verses 1 to 11. And we see that Joseph received a dream from God, but not everyone around him understood the dream. And sometimes sharing a dream, as I said on Sunday, can cause unnecessary conflict. There's times to share things and there's times not, and there's people to share things with and there's people not to share things with. Sometimes sharing what God's given us too soon can create unnecessary conflict. So here's the 3 questions for section 1 as you read Genesis 37 verses 1 to 11. Number 1, has God ever spoken something to you that other people couldn't see? I could speak all day long about that. Question 2, what's the difference between faith and foolishness when it comes to sharing dreams that God has given you? And question 3, why do you think God gives us glimpses of the future but doesn't always fulfill them straight away? So has God ever spoken something to you that others couldn't see? What's the difference between faith and foolishness when it comes to sharing dreams? And why do you think God gives us glimpses of the future but doesn't always fulfill them straight away? Have a great time discussing that, and I'll see you back in 10 minutes. Okay, so hopefully you've now unpaused your video. Otherwise you saw me sitting quietly like a tube for a few seconds. Anyway, we're figuring this out. Section number 2, we look at the fact that God was with Joseph even as he sold into slavery, which is a really crazy concept. The boys probably beat up a little bit, let's be honest, by his brothers, chucked in a pit, pulled out a pit, sold into slavery, sold on a profit, and yet the Bible says God was with him. So read Genesis 37, 18 to 28, and Genesis 39, verses 1 to 2, where it talks about in that crazy season of what went on, the Lord was with Joseph. Crazy. And ask yourself these 3 questions. And then again, after this, why not just pause the video, set a timer, ask yourself for questions, and then come back once you've done that. Question number 1, have you ever felt like you were in a pit season? And what kept you going? Question 2, what does God is with you look like in hardship? So when everything's going wrong, when nothing makes sense, when it's like you're in the worst situation ever, what does it mean that God is with you in that season? And question 3, what would it mean for us to be the kind of people where others can see that God is in us? So it talks about God was with Joseph, but it also talks about his master, Potiphar, could see that God was with him and therefore promoted him. So what would it mean for us to be the kind of people where others can see that God is with us? So again, number 1, have you ever felt like you were in a pit season? What kept you going? Number 2, what does God is with you look like in hardship? And number 3, what would it mean for us to be the kind of people where others can see that God is with us? Why don't you pause the video and go ahead and answer those questions? Okay, number 3, section 3. Hopefully you're doing well and you're still tracking with us. Section 3, I want us to think about having integrity when no one's watching, having integrity in private. Joseph had every excuse imaginable to give in to the temptation that Potiphar's wife tried to put him under. So we're going to read Genesis 39, 6 to 12, which is Potiphar's wife propositioning Joseph, a proposition that would have been easy to take. No one would ever have found out about it. No one needed to know. In actual fact, it was easier for Joseph to have slept with Potiphar's wife than it was for him to say no. She had the ability to get him into serious trouble, which is what she went ahead to do. But instead of giving in, Joseph chose purity. He didn't flirt with sin. He fled from it. Really fantastic example. So the questions for section 3 are: what temptations are easier to justify when life is unfair? Number 2, what does fleeing temptation look like in a modern context? So think about that in terms of relationship, workplace, online, or whatever else. In a modern context, what does fleeing from temptation look like? And question 3, how can we support each other to stay accountable in hard seasons? One of the key things about these home groups, as I said, is meaningful relationships. So hopefully as we get to know each other and we get to trust each other, we can actually help to build each other up, and we can help each other to keep ourselves accountable and help each other through difficult seasons of our life. So number 1, what temptations are easier to justify when life is unfair? Number 2, what does fleeing temptation look like in a modern context? Number 3, how can we support each other to stay accountable in hard seasons? Why don't you go ahead, pause the video and discuss. All right, number 4, section 4. We read about Joseph being misunderstood, thrown into prison. We read about him being forgotten by the cupbearer that said, I'll remember you when I got up and see the big man, I'll tell him about you, and he didn't. But yet we see Joseph still being faithful to God, and not once do we hear him complaining, moaning, grumbling, nothing. So read Genesis 40 verses 1 to 23. Joseph helped others to interpret dreams, but then for 2 years was forgotten about. But he keeps himself right. So 3 questions. Have you ever felt forgotten or overlooked? How did you respond to that? You can be honest too. Question 2, why is our attitude so important in a waiting season? And question 3, what does it look like to serve faithfully even when no one sees it? Joseph is serving faithfully, wasn't really massively being recognised. So have you ever felt forgotten or overlooked? How did you respond? Why is our attitude so important in a waiting season? What does it look like to serve faithfully even when no one sees it? Why don't you go ahead, pause the video and answer those questions. Okay guys, section 5. We are flying through. Flying through. Hopefully you're still with us. Genesis 41 verses 14 to 16 and Right, let me start again. Genesis 41 verses 14 to 16 and verses 37 to 40 is the next Bible passage we're in. So after 13 years of slavery in prison, God elevated Joseph overnight into the palace, which tells us really, really clearly that God's timing is perfect. 13 years of didn't seem like God was doing anything, and then overnight God promoted Joseph to the palace. And you might have felt like you've been waiting for a long time, but God can elevate you overnight. God can change the story overnight. We go through our periods of preparation, and in God's perfect timing, bang, God moves and God does whatever it is he's going to do. But it always comes after a time of preparation, often after years of preparation. And until we persevere and finish the preparation, we can't get the promotion. So don't despise the preparation. But here are the questions for section 5 as we think about God's timing being perfect. Question 1, why is delay often part of God's plan? Question 2, how does Joseph's humility in front of Pharaoh challenge our response to recognition? Remember, Joseph being in prison for so many years. Pharaoh gets him up and says, I understand you can help me. And Joseph doesn't say, yeah, you're right, I can help you. He actually said, I can't help you, but God can. Crazy humility. So how does that humility challenge our response when someone recognises us? Question 3, what would it look like for you to give glory to God in your current season? So why is delay often part of God's plan? How does Joseph's humility in front of Pharaoh challenge our response to recognition? And 3, what would it look like for you to give glory to God in your current season? Why don't you give a pause and discuss that? Okay, we're now 2 sections left. We're in section 6. None of you may be with me anymore. You may have spent so much time discussing the other stuff, and that's perfectly okay. But in this section, we're going to look at forgiveness. Forgiveness is what frees us. Forgiveness is absolutely huge and absolutely fundamental in the lives of in the lives of not just non-Christians, but of Christians and non-Christians alike. If you have not forgiven someone, if you're holding on to a grudge, you're probably only hurting yourself. That's the truth of it. So you're going to read Genesis 45, verses 1 to 8, and Genesis 50, verses 15 to 21. And think about how, as you read that, and what Joseph says to his brothers and how Joseph forgave his brothers. Joseph had every right to retaliate. He had every reason to retaliate. He had more reason to hold a grudge than any of us have ever had in our entire lives, unless, of course, you've been sold into slavery by that person, which you probably weren't. But despite the ability to have them flogged, beat up, imprisoned, killed, tortured, anything they wanted to do, he forgave them. And he forgave them time and time again. And he loved them, and most importantly, he saw God's hand in the situation. Through the hardship, through the pain, he saw God's hand. So questions for you. Who do you need to forgive, even if they don't deserve it? What does Joseph's response teach us about real strength? And how can seeing God's hand in hardship help us to move forward? What do you need to forgive? Who do you need to forgive, even if they don't deserve it? What does Joseph's response teach us about real strength? And how can seeing God's hand in hardship help us to move forward? Really important questions. Why don't you pause and head off and discuss that? Okay, guys, section 7, final section, talking about the final faith of Joseph. The reason we're in Joseph is because of the book of Hebrews. By faith, Joseph gave instructions concerning his bones, concerning the exodus of the Israelites. Joseph, although he was in Egypt, knew that his forefathers had been promised the land of Canaan, and he had so much faith that God was going to deliver on his promise that he gave instructions on his death about what was to happen to his body when this exodus took place. So Joseph died in Egypt, but his faith was in God's promise for the future. So in amongst that, I want you really to answer, I suppose, are you trusting God for things that you might not see in your lifetime? And we all should be. Absolutely, we're all trusting God for heaven. But some of us will be trusting God for people to come to faith that we might not get to see in our lifetime. Some of us will be trusting God for families after we're gone, various things like that. So I'm only going to ask 2 questions in this final section. Are you trusting God for things you may not see in your lifetime? And lastly, what would it look like to finish your race with the same kind of faith as Joseph had? So Joseph, it's really, really important we end well. A lot of people don't end well. Joseph lived well and ended well. Right at the end of his life, he was talking in faith about what God was still to do. So what would it look like for you to finish your race with the same kind of faith as Joseph had? And just before you go and discuss that, I want to just leave you with a final challenge, with a final encouragement really from the scriptures. If I was to, there's so much in the life of Joseph, it's crazy that like we could be teaching on it for a month. In actual fact, during COVID, I did do a full series on Joseph. So if you go back on the archives and on our YouTube channel, you'll find that if you want to do it. But the main standouts for me when thinking about Joseph is because Joseph didn't compromise his integrity in the pit, because he didn't complain in the prison, negative, moaning at God, because he kept himself right in that season. That's what got him the palace. And far too many people want the palace, but they've compromised in the pit and they've complained in the prison and they haven't trusted God, but yet they want elevated, and it's not going to work. We need to allow perseverance to happen, and we need to allow the preparation to finish before we get promoted. If we honour God where we are, in the season we're in the house we're in, with the car we have, in the workplace that we're in the school we're in whatever situation we're in, and with whatever we've got, if we honour God with it, where we are, with what we have, God will honour his promise, and he'll do it every single time. You can bet your house on it. It's a guarantee. So church, I pray you've been encouraged. I hope tonight's home group has been good, and I'll let you now go off and answer those final questions. God bless you.